1.3 1.3 Principles of Interpersonal Communication. Taking this course will change how you view communication. Most people admit that communication is important, but it's often in the back of our minds or viewed as something that just happens. Putting communication at the front of your mind and becoming more aware of how you communicate can be informative and have many positive effects. When I first started studying communication as an undergraduate, I began seeing the concepts we learned in class in my everyday life. When I worked in groups, I was able to apply what I had learned about group communication to improve my performance and overall experience. I also noticed interpersonal concepts and theories as I communicated within various relationships. Whether I was analyzing mediated messages or considering the ethical implications of a decision before I made it, studying communication allowed me to see more of what was going on around me, which allowed me to more actively and competently participate in various communication contexts. In this section, as we learn the principles of communication, I encourage you to take note of aspects of communication that you haven't thought about before and begin to apply the principles of communication to various parts of your life. In order to understand interpersonal communication, we must understand how interpersonal communication functions to meet our needs and goals, and how our interpersonal communication connects to larger social and cultural systems. Interpersonal communication is the process of exchanging messages between people whose lives mutually influence one another in unique ways in relation to social and cultural norms. This definition highlights the fact that interpersonal communication involves two or more people who are interdependent to some degree, and who build a unique bond based on the larger social and cultural context to which they belong. So a brief exchange with a grocery store clerk, who you don't know, wouldn't be considered interpersonal communication, because you and the clerk are not influencing each other in significant ways. Obviously, if the clerk were a friend, family member, coworker, or romantic partner, the communication would fall into the interpersonal category. In this section, we discuss the importance of studying interpersonal communication and explore its functional and cultural aspects. Why study interpersonal communication? Aside from making your relationships and health better, interpersonal communication skills are highly sought after by potential employers, consistently ranking in the top 10 in national surveys. 14. Each of these examples illustrates how interpersonal communication meets our basic needs as humans for security in our social bonds, health, and careers. But we are not born with all the interpersonal communication skills we'll need in life. So in order to make the most out of our interpersonal relationships, we must learn some basic principles. Think about a time when a short communication exchange affected a relationship almost immediately. Did you mean for it to happen? Many times we engage in interpersonal communication to fulfill certain goals we may have, but sometimes we are more successful than others. This is because interpersonal communication is strategic, meaning we intentionally create messages to achieve certain goals that help us function in society and our relationships. Goals vary based on the situation and the communicators, but ask yourself if you are generally successful at achieving the goals with which you enter a conversation or not. If so, you may already possess a high degree of interpersonal communication competence, or the ability to communicate effectively and appropriately in personal relationships. This chapter will help you understand some key processes that can make us more effective and appropriate communicators. You may be asking, aren't effectiveness and appropriateness the same thing? The answer is no. Imagine that you are the manager of a small department of employees at a marketing agency where you often have to work on deadlines. As a deadline approaches, you worry about your team's ability to work without your supervision to complete the tasks, so you interrupt everyone's work and assign them all individual tasks and give them a bulleted list of each subtask with a deadline to turn each part into you. You meet the deadline and have effectively accomplished your goal. Over the next month, one of your employees puts in her 2 weeks' notice, and you learn that she and a few others have been talking about how they struggle to work with you as a manager. Although your strategy was effective, many people do not respond well to strict hierarchy or micromanaging, and may have deemed your communication inappropriate. A more competent communicator could have implemented the same detailed plan to accomplish the task in a manner that included feedback, making the employees feel more included and heard. In order to be competent interpersonal communicators, we must learn to balance being effective and appropriate. Functional aspects of interpersonal communication. We have different needs that are met through our various relationships. Whether we are aware of it or not, we often ask ourselves, what can this relationship do for me? In order to understand how relationships achieve strategic functions, we will look at instrumental goals, relationship maintenance goals, and self-presentation goals. What motivates you to communicate with someone? We frequently engage in communication designed to achieve instrumental goals, such as gaining compliance, getting someone to do something for us, getting information we need, or asking for support. 15. In short, instrumental talk helps us get things done in our relationships. Our instrumental goals can be long-term or day-to-day. The following are examples of communicating for instrumental goals. You ask your friend to help you move this weekend, gaining resisting compliance. You ask your coworker to remind you how to balance your cash register till at the end of your shift, requesting or presenting information. You console your roommate after he loses his job, asking for or giving support. When we communicate to achieve relational goals, we are striving to maintain a positive relationship. Engaging in relationship maintenance communication is like taking your car to be serviced at the repair shop. To have a good relationship, just as to have a long-lasting car, we should engage in routine maintenance. For example, have you ever wanted to stay in and order a pizza and watch a movie, but your friend suggests that you go to a local restaurant and then to the theater? Maybe you don't feel like being around a lot of people or spending money or changing out of your pajamas, but you decide to go along with his or her suggestion. In that moment, you are putting your relational partner's needs above your own, which will likely make him or her feel valued. It is likely that your friend has made or will also make similar concessions to put your needs first, which indicates that there is a satisfactory and complementary relationship. Obviously, if one partner always insists on having his or her way, or always concedes becoming the martyr, the individuals are not exhibiting interpersonal communication competence. Other routine relational tasks include celebrating special occasions or honoring accomplishments, spending time together, and checking in regularly by phone, email, text, social media, or face-to-face communication. The following are examples of communicating for relational goals. You organize an office party for a coworker who has just become a U.S. citizen, celebrating honoring accomplishments. You make breakfast with your mom while you are home visiting, spending time together. You post a message on your long-distance friend's Facebook wall saying you miss him, checking in. Another form of relational talk that I have found very useful is what I call the DTR talk, which stands for Defining the Relationship Talk, and serves a relationship maintenance function. In the early stages of a romantic relationship, you may have a DTR talk to reduce uncertainty about where you stand by deciding to use the term boyfriend, girlfriend, or partner. In a DTR talk, you may proactively define your relationship by saying, "I'm glad I'm with you and no one else." Your romantic interest may respond favorably, echoing or rephrasing your statement, which gives you an indication that he or she agrees with you. The talk may continue on from there, and you may talk about what to call your relationship, set boundaries, or not. It is not unusual to have several DTR talks as a relationship progresses. At times, you may have to define the relationship when someone steps over a line by saying, "I think we should just be friends." This more explicit and reactive, rather than proactive communication can be especially useful in situations where a relationship may be unethical, inappropriate, or create a conflict of interest. For example, in a supervisor-supervisee, mentor-mentee, professional-client, or collegial relationship. We also pursue self-presentation goals by adapting our communication in order to be perceived in particular ways. Just as many companies, celebrities, and politicians create a public image, we desire to present different faces in different contexts. The well-known scholar Irving Goffman compared self-presentation to a performance and suggested we all perform different roles in different contexts. 16. Indeed, competent communicators can successfully manage how others perceive them by adapting to situations and contexts. A parent may perform the role of stern head of household, supportive shoulder to cry on, or hip and culturally aware friend to his or her child. A newly hired employee may initially perform the role of serious and agreeable coworker. Sometimes people engage in communication that doesn't necessarily present them in a positive way. For example, Haley, the oldest daughter in the television show Modern Family, often presents herself as incapable in order to get her parents to do her work. In one episode, she pretended she didn't know how to crack open an egg, so her mom Claire would make the brownies for her school bake sale. Here are some other examples of communicating to meet self-presentation goals. As your boss complains about struggling to format the company newsletter, you tell her about your experience with Microsoft Word and editing and offer to look over the newsletter once she's done to fix the formatting, presenting yourself as competent. You and your new college roommate stand in your dorm room full of boxes. You let him choose which side of the room he wants and then invite him to eat lunch with you, presenting yourself as friendly. You say, "I don't know," in response to a professor's question, even though you have an idea of the answer, presenting yourself as aloof or too cool for school. The Association of Image Consultants International, AICI, states that appearance, behavior, and communication are the ABCs of image. Many professional image consultants are licensed by this organization and provide a variety of services to politicians, actors, corporate trainers, public speakers, organizations, corporations, and television personalities such as news anchors. Visit the AICE website and read about image consulting, including the How to Choose, How to Become, and FAQs sections. Then consider the following questions. If you were to hire an image consultant for yourself, what would you have them work on for you? Why? What communication skills that you've learned about in the book so far would be most important for an image consultant to possess? Many politicians use image consultants to help them connect to voters and win elections. Do you think this is ethical? Why or why not? As if managing instrumental, relational, and self-presentation goals isn't difficult enough when we consider them individually, we must also realize that the three goal types are always working together. In some situations, we may privilege instrumental goals over relational or self-presentation goals. For example, if your partner is offered a great job in another state, and you decided to go with him or her, which will move you away from your job and social circle, you would be focusing on relational goals over instrumental or self-presentation goals. When you're facing a stressful situation and need your best friend's help, and call saying, "Hurry and bring me a gallon of gas or I'm going to be late to work," Lante, you are privileging instrumental goals over relational goals. Of course, if the person really is your best friend, you can try to smooth things over or make up for your shortness later. However, you probably wouldn't call your boss and bark a request to bring you a gallon of gas so you can get to work, because you likely want your boss to see you as dependable and likable, meaning you have focused on self-presentation goals. Interpersonal communication meets needs. You hopefully now see that communication is far more than the transmission of information. The exchange of messages and information is important for many reasons, but it is not enough to meet the various needs we have as human beings. While the content of our communication may help us achieve certain physical and instrumental needs, it also feeds into our identities and relationships in ways that far exceed the content of what we say. Physical needs. Physical needs include needs that keep our bodies and minds functioning. Communication, which we most often associate with our brain, mouth, eyes, and ears, actually has many more connections to and effects on our physical body and well-being. At the most basic level, communication can alert others that our physical needs are not being met. Even babies cry when they are hungry or sick to alert their caregiver of these physical needs. Asking a friend if you can stay at their house because you got evicted or kicked out of your own place will help you meet your physical need for shelter. There are also strong ties between the social function of communication and our physical and psychological health. Human beings are social creatures, which makes communication important for our survival. In fact, prolonged isolation has been shown to severely damage a human. 18. Aside from surviving, communication skills can also help us thrive. People with good interpersonal communication skills are better able to adapt to stress and have less depression and anxiety. Communication can also be therapeutic. which can lessen or prevent physical problems. A research study found that spouses of suicide or accidental death victims who did not communicate about the death with their friends were more likely to have health problems such as weight change and headaches than those who did talk with friends. 20 satisfying physical needs is essential for our physical functioning and survival. But in order to socially function and thrive, we must also meet instrumental, relational, and identity needs. Instrumental needs. Instrumental needs include needs that help us get things done in our day-to-day lives and achieve short and long-term goals. We all have short and long-term goals that we work on every day. Fulfilling these goals is an ongoing communicative task, which means we spend much of our time communicating for instrumental needs. Some common instrumental needs include influencing others, getting information we need, or getting support. 21. In short, communication that meets our instrumental needs helps us get things done. To meet instrumental needs, we often use communication strategically. Politicians, parents, bosses, and friends use communication to influence others in order to accomplish goals and meet needs. There is a research area within communication that examines compliance-gaining communication, or communication aimed at getting people to do something or act in a particular way. 22. Compliance-gaining and communicating for instrumental needs is different from coercion, which forces or manipulates people into doing what you want. Compliance-gaining communication is different from persuasion. While research on persuasion typically focuses on public speaking and how a speaker persuades a group, compliance-gaining research focuses on our daily interpersonal interactions. Researchers have identified many tactics that people typically use in compliance-gaining communication. 23. As you read through the following list, I am sure many of these tactics will be familiar to you. Common tactics used for compliance. Gaining 1. Offering rewards. Seeks compliance in a positive way by promising returns, rewards, or generally positive outcomes. 2. Threatening punishment. Seeks compliance in a negative way by threatening negative consequences such as loss of privileges, grounding, or legal action. 3. Using expertise. He seeks compliance by implying that one person knows better than the other based on experience, age, education, or intelligence. 4. Liking. Seeks compliance by acting friendly and helpful to get the other person into a good mood before asking them to do something. 5. Debt. Seeks compliance by calling in past favors and indicating that one person owes the other. 6. Altruism. Seeks compliance by claiming that one person only wants what is best for the other, and he or she is looking out for the other person's best interests. 7. Esteem. Seeks compliance by claiming that other people will think more highly of the person if he or she complies, or think less of the person if he or she does not comply. Relational needs. Relational needs include needs that help us maintain social bonds and interpersonal relationships. Communicating to fill our instrumental needs helps us function on many levels, but communicating for relational needs helps us achieve the social relating that is an essential part of being human. Communication meets our relational needs by giving us a tool through which to develop, maintain, and end relationships. In order to develop a relationship, we may use nonverbal communication to assess whether someone is interested in talking to us or not, then use verbal communication to strike up a conversation. Then, through the mutual process of self-disclosure, a relationship forms over time. Once formed, we need to maintain a relationship, so we use communication to express our continued liking of someone. We can verbally say things like, "You're such a great friend," or engage in behaviors that communicate our investment in the relationship, like organizing a birthday party. Although our relationships vary in terms of closeness and intimacy, all individuals have relational needs and all relationships require maintenance. Finally, communication, or the lack of it, helps us end relationships. We may communicate our deteriorating commitment to a relationship by avoiding communication with someone, verbally criticizing him or her, or explicitly ending a relationship. From spending time together, to checking in with relational partners by text, social media, or face-to-face, to celebrating accomplishments, to providing support during difficult times, Communication forms the building blocks of our relationships. Communicating for relational needs isn't always positive, though. Some people's relational needs are negative, unethical, or even illegal. Although we may feel the need to be passive-aggressive or controlling, these communicative patterns are not positive and can hurt our relationships. Identity needs. Identity needs include our need to present ourselves to others and be thought of in particular and desired ways. Communication allows us to present ourselves to others in particular ways. Just as many companies, celebrities, and politicians create a public image, we desire to present different faces in different contexts. The influential scholar Irving Goffman compared self-presentation to a performance and suggested we all perform different roles in different contexts. 24 Indeed, competent communicators can successfully manage how others perceive them by adapting to situations and contexts. A parent may perform the role of stern head of household, supportive shoulder to cry on, or hip and culturally aware friend based on the situation they are in with their child. A newly hired employee may initially perform the role of motivated and agreeable coworker, but later perform more leadership behaviors after being promoted. Communication is a process. We have already learned in the transaction model of communication that we communicate using multiple channels and send and receive messages simultaneously. There are also messages and other stimuli around us that we never actually perceive because we can only attend to so much information at one time. The dynamic nature of communication allows us to examine some principles of communication that are related to its processual nature. Next, we will learn that communication messages vary in terms of their level of conscious thought and intention. Communication is irreversible, and communication is unrepeatable. Communication is intentional and unintentional. Some scholars have put forth definitions of communication, stating that messages must be intended for others to perceive them in order for a message to count as a communication. This narrow definition only includes messages that are tailored or at least targeted to a particular person or group, and excludes any communication that is involuntary. Frank E. X. Dance and Carl E. Larson, The Functions of Human Communication, A Theoretical Approach, New York, New York. Holt, Reinhardt, and Winston, 1976, 25. Since intrapersonal communication happens in our heads and isn't intended for others to perceive, it 30 wouldn't be considered communication. But imagine the following scenario. You and I are riding on a bus and you are sitting across from me. As I sit thinking about a stressful week ahead, I wrinkle up my forehead, shake my head, and put my head in my hands. Upon seeing this, you think, that guy must be pretty stressed out. In this scenario, did communication take place? If I really didn't intend for anyone to see the nonverbal communication that went along with my intrapersonal communication, then this definition would say no. But even though words weren't exchanged, you still generated meaning from the communication I was unintentionally sending. As a communication scholar, I do not take such a narrow definition of communication. Based on the definition of communication from the beginning of this chapter, the scenario we just discussed would count as communication, but the scenario illustrates the point that communication messages are sent both intentionally and unintentionally. Communication is conscious and unconscious. Communication messages also vary in terms of the amount of conscious thought that goes into their creation. In general, we can say that intentional communication usually includes more conscious thought, and unintentional communication usually includes less. For example, some communication is reactionary and almost completely involuntary. We often scream when we are frightened, say ouch, when we stub our toe, and stare blankly when we are bored. This isn't the richest type of communication, but it is communication. Some of our interactions are slightly more substantial and include more conscious thought, but are still very routine. For example, we say excuse me when we need to get past someone, say thank you when someone holds the door for us, or say what's up to our neighbor we pass every day in the hall. The reactionary and routine types of communication just discussed are common, but the messages most studied by communication scholars are considered constructed communication. These messages include more conscious thought and intention than reactionary or routine messages, and often go beyond information exchange to also meet relational and identity needs. As we will learn later on, A higher degree of conscious thought and intention doesn't necessarily mean the communication will be effective, understood, or ethical. In addition, ethical communicators cannot avoid responsibility for the effects of what they say by claiming they didn't intend for their communication to cause an undesired effect. Communication has short and long-term effects, which illustrates the next principle we will discuss. Communication is irreversible. Communication is irreversible. The dynamic nature of the communication process also means that communication is irreversible. After an initial interaction has gone wrong, characters in sitcoms and romantic comedies often use the line, "Can we just start over?" As handy as it would be to be able to turn the clock back and redo a failed or embarrassing communication encounter, it is impossible. Miscommunication can occur regardless of the degree of conscious thought and intention put into a message. For example, if David tells a joke that offends his coworker Beth, then he can't just say, "Oh, forget I said that," or "I didn't intend for it to be offensive." The message has been sent, and it can't be taken back. I'm sure we have all wished we could take something back that we have said. Conversely, when communication goes well, we often wish we could recreate it. However, in addition to communication being irreversible, it is also unrepeatable. Communication is not repeatable. If you try to recreate a good job interview experience by asking the same questions and telling the same stories about yourself, you can't expect the same results. Even trying to repeat a communication encounter with the same person won't feel the same or lead to the same results. We have already learned the influence that contexts have on communication, and those contexts change frequently. Even if the words and actions stay the same, the physical, psychological, social, relational, and cultural contexts will vary and ultimately change the communication encounter. Have you ever tried to recount a funny or interesting experience to a friend who doesn't really seem that impressed? These, "I guess you had to be there" moments illustrate the fact that communication is unrepeatable. Communication is guided by rules and norms. Earlier, we learned about the transaction model of communication and the powerful influence that social context and the roles and norms associated with social context have on our communication. Whether verbal or nonverbal, mediated or interpersonal, our communication is guided by rules and norms. 32 Phatic Communion is an instructive example of how we communicate under the influence of rules and norms. 25 Phatic Communion refers to scripted and routine verbal interactions that are intended to establish social bonds rather than actually exchange meaning. The term Phatic Communion derives from the Greek word phatos, which means spoken, and the word communion, which means connection or bond. As we discussed earlier, communication helps us meet our relational needs. In addition to finding communion through food or religion, we also find communion through our words. But the degree to which and in what circumstances we engage in phatic communion is also influenced by norms and rules. Generally, U.S. Americans find silence in social interactions awkward, which is one sociocultural norm that leads to phatic communion, because we fill the silence with pointless words to meet the social norm. It is also a norm to greet people when you encounter them, especially if you know them. We all know not to unload our physical and mental burdens on the person who asks, "How are you?" or go through our to-do list with the person who asks, "What's up?" Instead, we conform to social norms through this routine type of verbal exchange. Phatic communion, like most aspects of communication we will learn about, is culturally relative as well. While most cultures engage in phatic communion, the topics of and occasions for phatic communion vary. Scripts for greetings in the United States are common, but scripts for leaving may be more common in another culture. Asking about someone's well-being may be acceptable phatic communion in one culture, and asking about the health of someone's family may be more common in another.